Forget everything you know about the moon landing. For 53 years, not a single human left low Earth orbit. Not once. And then, 5 days ago, that changed. On April 1st, 2026, Artemis II launched, a rocket carrying 4 astronauts that tore through the Florida sky and aimed itself at the moon, sending humans farther from Earth than anyone has been since 1972. Inside that spacecraft, Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen are doing things Apollo astronauts couldn't even imagine, things that would have looked like science fiction half a century ago. So, what changed in 50 years? Almost everything. Let's start with the spacecraft itself. Take the Apollo Command Module. 3 astronauts, sealed inside about 210 cubic feet of space. That's roughly the size of a large closet. Imagine 3 grown adults living inside a closet for up to 2 weeks. Sleeping there, eating there, working there with nowhere to stretch, nowhere to escape. Now, fast forward to Artemis II. The spacecraft they're flying, Orion, gives 4 astronauts about 330 cubic feet of space. That's nearly 60% more room. Still tight, still confined. But now imagine 2 empty minivans parked side by side. That's the difference. And when you're 250,000 miles from the nearest hospital, that extra space isn't comfort, it's survival. But this is where things start to change, because the difference between Apollo and Artemis isn't just size, it's how humans live in space. Apollo astronauts didn't have a bathroom, not really. They used adhesive bags in front of each other, then sealed them and stored them inside the cabin for the rest of the mission. Many astronauts later said it was one of the worst parts of spaceflight. Now compare that to Orion, a dedicated hygiene bay with doors that close, a real toilet system based on the one used on the International Space Station. Waste is collected, processed, separated, and for the first time in deep space, there's privacy. It sounds small, but when you're living in a metal capsule for 10 days, small things become everything. And then there's something Apollo never even attempted: exercise. Apollo astronauts didn't work out. There wasn't space. There wasn't equipment. NASA simply accepted that their muscles and bones would weaken. And they did. Some astronauts came home barely able to stand. Now picture this. On Artemis II, the crew is doing deadlifts on their way to the moon. Every day, except launch and landing, they train for 30 minutes using a device called a flywheel. It weighs about 30 pounds, fits inside something the size of a carry-on suitcase, and works like a high-resistance yo-yo. Pull harder, it pulls back harder, up to 400 pounds of resistance. You can row, squat, deadlift, all in zero gravity. For comparison, the International Space Station uses exercise equipment that weighs over 4,000 pounds. This does a surprising amount of the same work, with almost nothing. And this is the shift. We're not just sending humans to space anymore, we're learning how to keep them strong while they're there, because the moon isn't the final destination. Now step outside the spacecraft, because how you get there matters just as much as what you fly in. Apollo rode the Saturn V, at the time, the most powerful rocket ever built. 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. A machine so powerful it shook the ground for miles. But Artemis, it rides something even stronger. The Space Launch System. 8.8 million pounds of thrust. About 17% more. And like Saturn V, it's not reusable. It doesn't land on drone ships. It doesn't come back. It launches once, and it's gone. Because this rocket wasn't designed to be cheap. It was designed to do one thing. Throw humans toward the moon in a single launch. No assembly, no refueling, no second chances. But what sits on top of that rocket? That's where everything changes. Apollo ran on fuel cells and batteries, finite power, every system drawing from a limited supply, every decision tied to how much energy remained. Orion unfolds solar arrays, 4 wings covered in photovoltaic cells. As long as sunlight is available, power keeps coming. Not infinite, but close enough to change everything. Suddenly, systems can run longer. Redundancy increases, margins expand. And psychologically, the mission feels different. Apollo astronauts were always aware of the clock. Orion astronauts still manage oxygen and water. But electricity? It regenerates. That changes how you operate in deep space. And then, there's something Apollo never had at all: international collaboration. Apollo was American from top to bottom. Artemis isn't. Orion's service module, the part that keeps the crew alive, was built in Europe by Airbus, provided by the European Space Agency. There's a Canadian astronaut on board because of a treaty signed in 2020. Future missions will involve a lunar space station, the Gateway, built by multiple countries. This is no longer one nation racing to the moon. It's many nations building something together. Messy, slower, more complex, but also more sustainable. Now go deeper, inside the spacecraft, behind the panels, because this is where the real leap happens. Apollo's guidance computer had about 72 kilobytes of memory. That's less than a single photo on your phone. It could process around 40,000 instructions per second. Orion? Its computers are roughly 20,000 times faster. 4 independent systems running in parallel, each one far more powerful than anything Apollo ever had. The cockpit is entirely digital. Glass screens, software interfaces, real-time adjustments. Apollo astronauts relied heavily on mission control, reading gauges, calling down data, letting Houston do the math. Orion can fly itself. It already did. During Artemis 1, the uncrewed mission completed a full trip around the moon and returned autonomously. But here's the twist. The astronauts aren't just passengers. They've been manually flying the spacecraft in deep space, testing it, steering it, learning how it responds, because in the future, there won't always be time to call Earth. A signal to the moon takes seconds. To Mars, up to 20 minutes. In an emergency. You're on your own, and this is where things get even more surreal. Communication itself has changed. Apollo used radio waves, limited bandwidth, scratchy audio, slow data. Orion uses lasers, infrared light beams transmitting massive amounts of data. By just the 4th day of the mission, over 100 gigabytes had already been sent back to Earth. High-resolution images. Near real-time, think about that. Apollo missions returned data measured in megabytes. Artemis is streaming deep space. When an astronaut looks out the window, the world sees it within hours. But the view itself, that's different too. Apollo flew about 70 miles above the moon, close enough to see craters in detail. Artemis 2 won't. At closest approach, Orion will be about 4,600 miles away, which means something incredible. Instead of seeing a strip of terrain, the crew sees the entire moon, pole to pole, filling the window. A perspective no Apollo astronaut ever had at that distance. And because of this trajectory, they've already seen something no human ever has. The Orientale Basin, a massive impact crater near the boundary of the moon's near and far sides. Robots saw it, satellites mapped it, but no human had ever looked at it directly, until now. And then, something even rarer happens, a solar eclipse, but not the kind you know, from their position behind the moon. Earth moves in front of the sun, blocking it, for nearly an hour. Imagine that, your entire home planet. Reduced to a thin crescent. drifting across the sun, while you float in silence behind the moon. No Apollo crew ever saw this. The geometry never aligned. This time, it did. And by this point, you're farther from Earth than any human in history. The current record? Apollo 13, about 248,655 miles. An accident, a mission gone wrong. Artemis 2 will reach around 252,757 miles on purpose. What was once an emergency trajectory is now the plan. But everything leads to one moment: re-entry. Because getting there is only half the story. Coming home, that's the real test. Orion will hit Earth's atmosphere at about 25,000 miles per hour, faster than any crewed spacecraft ever. The heat shield will face temperatures near 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Plasma will form around the vehicle, blocking all communication. For several minutes, they are completely alone. No contact, no updates, just trust. And here's the part that adds tension. After Artemis 1, engineers found unexpected erosion on the heat shield. It held, it worked, but not exactly as predicted. There were debates, concerns, calls for redesigns. In the end, NASA approved it. The crew knows, and they accepted the risk. Because exploration has never been about perfect safety, it's about moving forward anyway. And then there's the crew itself, something Apollo never represented. Victor Glover becomes the first person of color to leave low Earth orbit. Christina Koch becomes the first woman. Jeremy Hansen becomes the first non-American, for the first time. A deep space crew looks more like humanity. Not just history, but there's something quieter happening too. Inside their bodies, they're being monitored constantly. Radiation exposure, sleep cycles, cardiovascular changes. Because once you leave Earth's magnetic field, you lose protection. The Van Allen belts trap radiation around Earth. Most astronauts never go beyond them. Artemis 2 does, twice, on the way out, on the way back. Apollo astronauts saw flashes of light, cosmic rays hitting their eyes. Now we understand why. And this data, it will define how long humans can safely travel in deep space, including Mars. Right now, as you're watching this, 4 humans are out there eating rehydrated meals, sleeping on walls, exercising on a device the size of a suitcase, flying a spacecraft powered by the sun, seeing parts of the moon no one alive has ever seen, and drifting farther from Earth than anyone ever has. All inside a capsule, because after all the technology, all the progress, that part hasn't changed. It's still a metal shell, keeping humans alive in an environment that wants them gone. And when they return, they won't come back as conquerors. Apollo landed on the moon. That was the goal. Mission accomplished. Artemis 2 is something else. They're pathfinders, testing systems, validating technology, collecting data, because the moon is no longer the destination. It's the first stop. Everything they're doing, life support, navigation, radiation tracking, even the exercise equipment, is laying the groundwork for something much bigger. Mars. Orion has already been studied for missions lasting up to 1,000 days. This is step 1. And then, just before they come home, there's one final moment. They pass behind the moon. For about 40 minutes. There is no signal, no communication, no connection to Earth, just silence. The same silence Apollo astronauts experienced. That hasn't changed. The moon still blocks the signal. The void is still the void. And in that silence, floating farther from Earth than any human in history, they experience something no technology can remove. What it really means, to be alone in space.